Working in the psychedelic field for about 6 years now, which has been quite an exciting change and trying to figure this all out. This week I actually was at a conference at Harvard Law, meeting with people and talking about psychedelics and the future movement. And it'll be very interesting in the next couple of weeks what we're going to see is happening here when the FDA comes out with the official ruling of what's going to happen with MDMA. So, pretty excited to see how that goes. As I said, I've been working in the psychedelic field here for about 6 years. I do education with Psychedelics Today, their podcast and their year-long certificate program. I'm a graduate of the CIIS year-long certificate program on psychedelic medicine. During that time, some great contact with people, trying to figure out where are we going to go. They had the first program in the nation that started talking about psychedelic as medicines. So, where do we begin with this? People start thinking that psychedelics is a new thing, and it's kind of a new thing that we're coming forward with. But in reality, many of these medicines have been used for thousands of years with indigenous practices, and even within psychiatry. It all started back in the 50s and in the 60s when psychedelic medicines were fully legal, and people were kind of trying to figure out, what do we do with this? I'm kind of biased. I will say I'm a nurse. I think that nursing is perfectly fit into doing this, and it's going to be exciting to see how this goes. Let's see here. So the word psychedelic is a neologism, meaning it's a made-up word with two parts. Coming together with psyche, meaning soul, into loud, which means to become visible or reveal. Literally it translates into mind manifesting. So these medicines, these psychedelics, they're unlike other substances. What they do is they expand the mind. They're the only type of drug that is known to alter mental thoughts and feelings that can also be achieved through dream and religious type of experiences. When we start looking at these medicines, I just want to kind of mention, I'm going to talk about a few different substances, just so everyone's on the same page. LSD is commonly known as acid. I'm going to be referring to it as LSD. Psilocybin is often known as shrooms, mushrooms, and I'm also going to be using the word MDMA, which is commonly known by a street name as Molly or ecstasy. And then the last one is DMT, which has a couple of different formulations. So as I said, psychedelics, a little history here. In 1944, Albert Hoffman was the first individual who, by coincidence, by chance, he found that LSD has psychoactive effects, which then 3 years later, the first paper on LSD was published in 1947. And then we fast forward a little bit. In 1957, magic mushrooms was coined. It was a great article in Life magazine telling the story of Gordon Wasson, who was a Wall Street banker, and his wife. And they went down into Oaxaca, Mexico, and while they were there, they end up going in and going under a mushroom voyage with Maria Sabina. And as a result of that moment in time and the coverage and getting pictures, it was the first time that an outsider, a white man, was in there doing these substances. And as a result of that paper in Life magazine, it changed the landscape of so many things. As a result of it, people started knowing what are these substances, what are people doing, which then led to an influx of people going into Mexico trying to find this out themselves, with different participants such as John Lennon and the Beatles, Bob Dylan, Pele, Janis Joplin. All of these individuals came there, which has changed the landscape of music in so many different things. Around the same time, there was a huge experiment that was held at Marsh Chapel in Boston. And in there, a divinity student named Walter Pankey went in. He was a PhD level theologian and started to look at the effects of psychedelics and spirituality. During that time, they ended up, groups went into this basement of the Marsh Chapel and partook either with a placebo or with active mushrooms. And very quickly, you could find out who received which, if it was nothing or something, which then really just changed the outlook of what are we doing with these things. Walter Pankey came out during a conference urging other people that the dangers of abuse must not be allowed to cloud the solid scientific evidence showing how, when psychedelics are administered in controlled settings, permanent adverse reactions are rare, and that things can change, and changing numerous ways of changing healing capacity. This research went on for a number of years. During that time, in the 50s and 60s, over 40,000 patients received psychedelic medicines. Several dozen books were published. There were 6 international conferences that occurred and over 1,000 clinical papers. So this wasn't something that was completely new as we start talking about these substances now. There's some great research back before we really knew what were we doing with it. That ended up changing in 1970. In 1970, with Nixon, they changed and formed what's called the Controlled Substances Act, which then made all these substances become illegal overnight, which poses many challenges. So right now, these substances are listed as Schedule 1 narcotic substances, meaning that they have a high potential for abuse. There's no currently accepted medical treatments within the United States for it, and there's a lack of safety or use in supervision. This is despite everything that people know that's occurring in the underground and what's going on inside of research places now. I mean, if you turn on TV and turn on 60 Minutes, maybe there's some people coming out talking about these substances. So it's a really exciting time when we start to see all these changes occurring. Now, these psychedelic substances that I mentioned all have one thing in common. Really, they start working on the serotonin 2A receptor. I'm not going to go too far into the details of that. They work completely different than standard medicine. Most medicines that work on depression and mood, things like that, the SSRI medications typically, they all act on a different serotonin receptor. So we started looking at the effects that these have. They're the only medicine that someone can take once and completely change their outlook, their view of life, and everything. Years later, and having these lasting effects that go on. Now, the hard part we have to kind of get around is the fact that many of us grew up in the 80s, the war on drugs, this is bringing on drugs, Brian and Ed, indoctrinated into how dangerous these substances are, when in reality they're not. They do come with risks, but they're not inherently dangerous. One of the most exciting medicines that we start looking at right now is MDMA. MDMA was legal until 1985, and during that time of it becoming legal, while it was legal, many people were using it in the underground and found there's a great healing capacity to it. It's not a classic psychedelic in its effects. What it does is it works a little differently, and with that it starts changing other things such as oxytocin, prolactin, cortisol levels. So we start looking at what are those substances, what are those changes? Like with oxytocin, it starts changing closeness. It's one of the are secreted when bonding with children as someone is born. With that oxytocin that's there, we start seeing increased levels of empathy, trust, caring. People can accurately have perception of what their emotions are.
Thanks for showing up.
Feeling more socially, more increased social ability, being connected with other people, which is why it is a great substance and being explored for PTSD. As we know, with PTSD, people start feeling more detached, depressed, not connected to people. And when they start thinking about what the traumas that they've gone through, we start seeing this emotional reaction that comes up. Heart rate goes up, we start getting more anxious, people can end up shutting down, you can't talk about it, which makes it really difficult to treat something such as PTSD. But when we administer MDMA, someone is able to go on an inward journey, start looking at what's going on around them, it kind of gets rid of that fear activation, so they can accurately go in and look without having an emotional response shooting up, which is there. So it leads us into what's called an optimal arousal zone, where people have an increased memory of this traumatic event without that overwhelming feeling that activates them. This is unlike any other medication that is out there that can help with anxiety and stress. Most of those types of medications make us tired, more sedate, which then makes it very difficult to actually have therapy and talking with people. With MDMA, what we found is, compared to placebo in the phase 3 clinical trials, 67% of people who used MDMA had improvements. 67% no longer had symptoms of PTSD, compared to 32% of individuals that had a placebo. As we start moving forward here, it's going to be interesting because in about a little over a week, so next Monday, we're going to see when the FDA is going to make an official stance if it's going to become legal or not. If there's going to be an accepted form of treatment for PTSD with maps like those legally charged. It's going to be exciting to see if it's going to change healthcare completely. The first application is looking at having potentially therapy involved, like psychotherapy, which is completely not what the FDA does. It's not their business. They don't overlook that.